Hi guys, Hannah here with Spot On Dog. Today I want to talk to you about dog daycares, and what sparked this idea for me to want to do a video about it is an experience I just had with a friend of mine's, his dog. I'm pet sitting for him right now, and I just dropped his dog Bam Bam off at a dog daycare that I've never been to before. So I wasn't all that impressed, and I didn't have a great experience there. I'm not going to mention the name of the business. I'm not here to bash anybody or anything like that. But it just got me thinking that there's so many dog daycares out there popping up now, and they're not all created equal. So some are really great, some are awful, and most are somewhere in between. And they're not all right for your dog, and your dog might just not be right for daycare at all. So I just wanted to go over, this is going to be a two-part video because unfortunately YouTube limits my videos to 15 minutes still. So the first video that I'm going to make is going to be about just dog daycares in general, and what are the pros and what are the cons of using a dog daycare. And then part two of the video is going to be about the actual questions that you should ask your dog daycare before you decide to use it, and what answers you should be hearing, and what you should be observing and looking for when you take a tour of the facility. And if they don't let you take a tour at all, just forget it. Okay, so moving on to general stuff about dog daycares. So the pros, I made a list here. Feel free to add to it. If you can think of any more, you can put it in the comments. So obviously getting a lot of exercise and physical stimulation is a good pro to a dog daycare. So rather than your dog laying around on his butt all day, he's going to be running around and playing with other dogs. So it's a really great way for him to burn calories and stay healthy and fit. A good side perk of that is that your dog will be tired and worn out, hopefully most of the time, when you go to pick him up from dog daycare. So a big problem that a lot of people have, or that they mentioned to me, is after they get home from work, they don't know what to do with their dog because, you know, they're exhausted, they worked all day, they just want to kick back and relax and veg out and go to sleep, and their dog wants to party because he's been asleep all day and he's so excited that his owner's home and he wants to play and be crazy and all that. And so it's kind of a mixed match of energy levels. So dog daycare is great for dogs to go and wear themselves out there, so that when you get home from work and you pick your dog up, you guys are both ready to crash together. Another great benefit is that your dog obviously is able to play with other dogs. So sometimes, you know, if you have a busy schedule or you're not around a dog park or something, dog daycare is the best and sometimes only place where your dog can just play off leash with a bunch of other dogs. And if your dog loves other dogs, then that's a really cool thing for him to be able to do. I want to mention that this is not the same thing as socialization. So if your dog is not friendly with other dogs and is not playful, then bringing him to dog daycare is not the way that you're going to socialize him. But that's for another video another day. Another reason to bring your dog to a dog daycare is it's a great temporary solution for avoiding and preventing behavioral issues at home. So, for instance, if your dog chews up your house, breaks out of his crate, tries to escape, barks all day, and your neighbors are complaining, has separation anxiety, becomes bored, frustrated, anxious, whatever, then bringing him to a dog daycare could be a good solution for you so you don't get evicted. But he's got to like other dogs. So, and just in general, you know, if your dog gets to play with other dogs and be physically active and mentally and physically and emotionally stimulated every day at dog daycare, then I think it's fair to say that in general, he could be a more just satisfied and less frustrated dog, just, you know, in general. But again, that only goes if your dog actually enjoys the dog daycare and does well there. It could also go the other way. So we'll talk about that now. So those were all the pros. Cons of taking your dog to a dog daycare. So just as a dog trainer, just the first things that pop into mind are all training related stuff that drives me crazy. And I usually end up advising my clients that I'm working with not to take their dog to a dog daycare, because usually I'm working with them because their dog has some sort of shyness or fearfulness or reactivity to other dogs or something like that, and a dog daycare is just way too overwhelming for them. So training-wise, we'll go to behavioral stuff next. Just training-wise first. Things that bad habits that a dog could pick up at a dog daycare are jumping up on people, jumping on top of other dogs for that matter. Barking. I have been to dog daycares where there's always one or two dogs who just stand there and bark their heads off for several minutes before anybody stops them or redirects them to do something else. And this is bad because it's self-reinforcing. And self-reinforcing means the dog can just stand there and do it all day and it's fun. He's rewarding himself. So the more he does it, the more likely he is to do it in the future. So you go from a dog that learns that barking his head off at daycare is fun and acceptable behavior, and then he starts doing it at home, and then he starts doing it around dogs he sees on walks, and then he starts doing it at cafes when people walk by and he wants attention or he's feeling excited or whatever. So dogs that weren't barking before might become barkers once they go to daycare. Listening skills. Dog daycare can blow your training out of the water really quickly. So you've got a bunch of dogs running around in a room. It's loud, it's noisy. You've got staff members who, are multitasking and trying to keep track of a bunch of dogs at once, and they're yelling your dog's name, Max, stop it. Max, come here. Max, get that out of your mouth. Max, stop harassing that dog. Max, 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 Max. And the dog hears blah, 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 blah. And they learn that they can just run around in a free-for-all and play with a bunch of dogs and pretty much just ignore people when they're talking to them. And most of the staff aren't going to actually follow through and enforce anything with your dog. They're just going to try a few times and they go, nah, whatever, he's having a good time. And they're going to let him do what he wants to do. So your dog will develop some pretty bad listening skills. Pulling, a really common thing that I see at dog daycares is the dog pulls the owner all the way out of the car through the front door, and then they hand him off to the staff member, and the dog pulls the staff member all the way through the lobby, down the hall, and through the gate into the playroom. So the entire way from, pretty much your house to getting to play with the dogs, your dog is being rewarded for pulling, 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 and then you wonder why when you get home, your dog sees another dog and starts pulling, pulling, pulling. So definitely a bad side effect that can happen. And lastly on the training list is just general rudeness, which kind of goes along with the poor listening skills. But a lot of dogs at daycare just learn to kind of do their own thing, and they're off on a free-for-all with a pack full of dogs, and they really don't care to listen to anybody, and they play really wild, and they race around and totally, knock over and bump into the staff who are standing there and jump up on the gates and bark and go crazy and rush in and out of the gates when they're let in or taken out or whatever, and they kind of just learn to be rude, or can learn to be rude if the place isn't run all that great. So those are all just training things. When you get more into behavioral stuff, one of the things that I worry about and I see a lot is that dogs learn to become very overstimulated at the sight of other dogs. So the reason that happens, and it can especially happen if you start bringing your dog at a young age, like 6, 7, 8 months, when they're still learning kind of the right way to play with other dogs. What can happen, especially if it's a dog daycare that kind of lets in some dogs that shouldn't be there, your puppy or dog will end up getting really overstimulated and playing with a bunch of dogs who might be too rough when they play, who might be overly aggressive when they play, who might be snarky or easily irritated or bark a lot or whatever. And so your dog will learn that it's just a free-for-all of excitement and overstimulation every time he's around dogs. And the way that ends up affecting you and your dog in real life is that now every time he sees a dog in any other situation, such as on a walk when he's on leash or outside a cafe when he's tethered to your chair leg, is they don't know how to handle themselves. They go ballistic because the only context that they know dogs in is just crazy free-for-all play for hours and hours on end. So that's another behavioral side effect. Dogs can pick up fearfulness and aggression at a dog daycare. So if they go in already a little bit unsure and fearful and they just have a few bad experiences with a dog who's not respecting their space or comes on too strong or plays too rough or they get injured or something like that, your dog can end up learning to become reactive and fearful and aggressive around other dogs. Other behavioral things, potty issues, especially if you have a young dog who's just learning potty training. For dog daycares that don't have outdoor areas, it can be confusing for the dog because they just, if they're there all day, they have to go, so they're going to poop and pee wherever they're standing, and they're going to smell all the other dogs poop and peeing in there. So it kind of trains them to go indoors, which is not what you want. And then other big behavioral concerns would be stuff like fence fighting and just fighting in general. So fence fighting is when you have, all the different play groups and there's fences in between, and the dogs end up running up and down either side and snarling and lunging and barking at each other because it's fun. And then your dog might end up being more aggressive when he's on leash or when he's behind a fence at your house or something like that. So, and just fights in general. It doesn't matter what kind of protocols you have in place or how good you are with dogs or whatever. If you've got 30 dogs in a room together and they're not well managed and they're all different types of temperaments and you've only got 1 or 2 staff members in there with them, which is usually how it is, eventually a fight's going to break out. And thankfully, normally dog fights are not that bad because if a dog is well socialized and friendly, usually they don't want to hurt each other. So it's just a lot of snarly, growly, paws flailing around and stuff like that, but nobody actually wants to bite or hurt anybody. But sometimes they do bite and there are injuries, and that's a behavioral concern. So not just for the dogs involved, but all the other dogs in the group. When you're a dog and you're in a group with 2 other dogs who start violently fighting, that could affect you. And that's the neighbor's dog barking and howling at something. Sorry about that distraction. So other cons, other than training and behavioral stuff, just physical stress. It can be pretty stressful on the body to be playing for 8 hours straight on concrete floors, because it's usually concrete or epoxy flooring. And that can be pretty stressful for the joints and the ligaments and the bones. Because if you think about it, a dog normally would have periods of rest and then periods of play. And so a dog daycare doesn't really allow for too much of that, which we'll talk about in a second. So physical stress, exhaustion and no break from the stimulation. Getting sprayed with spray bottles, that's something that I see a lot because it's one of the only ways that the staff feels like they can manage the dogs, and there's not much else they can do. So when dogs are barking or humping each other or carrying on or whatever, they'll tend to, yell at them and spray them with a water bottle from across the room. Works for some dogs. For others, it's just rewarding because they actually like the attention and they like getting sprayed. So you'll have one dog getting sprayed in the face who loves it, and the other one getting sprayed and it's really scary and he hates it, and neither one is really a good option for a dog at a dog daycare. So and then lastly, oh, and by the way, also when they spray the dogs, if you have a dog who's a barker and he gets sprayed a lot in the face during daycare, it can cause ear infections, because what ends up happening is the spray goes inside of his ear and it just stays there, and it happens day after day after day, and the dog ends up with an ear infection. And you wonder where it came from. It came from your dog daycare. So the last one would be diseases and infections. So this would just be like skin infections, infections around the nail bed from all the walking around on the dirty floor, ear infections, different little scratches and abscesses, and also diseases like, the worst one would be parvo, which hopefully, if all the dogs are vaccinated, there shouldn't even be an issue. But other stuff that's more common, like kennel cough, otherwise known as bordetella, things like that, worms, different things they can pick up. So that's the complete list of pros and cons that I could think of. If you can think of any others, please let me know in the comments why you do or don't bring your dog to a dog daycare, and any great experiences or horror stories that you have. And please watch video 2, portion 2 of this, where I'm actually going to talk to you about how to make sure that you can pick out a good dog daycare and avoid the cons and get as many of the pros as you can, and what questions you should be asking and what answers you should be listening for. So I'll see you at part 2.